My name is Bethel Afwork, and I'm one of the co-founders and executive director for the Alcove Center for the Arts. I think of the Alcove as like the YMCA for arts. So when you go to the YMCA, you can, go to the gym at any point. You can do workshops. There's different events there and things like that. So the idea is that at the Alcove, you can come in. We'll provide you different supplies and instruments to indulge in creativity. We'll have more structured things like workshops and, of course, events. When we have our own space, we also have like private studio spaces for artists as well. I think the idea really came about when me and my friend were looking for something to do. We were sitting, we were like, we wish we could just be at a place, just like, you go out to eat or go to the gym or something where we could just go and drop in and there'd be like something to do, but like something a little bit more on the creative side that was social and recreational as well. And then when we started hosting the show called Raw Voices, we realized there was like a really big need for more eclectic, welcoming spaces. So Raw Voices is a spoken word comedy and music show that had open mic and feature performances, and it started in July 2016 and it ran all the way till February 2020. And then of course the pandemic happened, and that's when we kind of scaled back and regrouped and were like, hey, like this is a concept, the Alcove. It wasn't called the Alcove at the time, but like we were like, why don't we just start working on that creative space, kind of recreational art space concept we've always had. And we realized kind of how difficult it is to have shows like Raw Voices. It took a lot of organizing with bar owners who are trying to really pitch and convince people, no, like we need something like this that isn't just like on a Wednesday night and that's for young people. So I think Raw Voices really inspired us to have, to one day own our own space and do more than just shows, to have things for people to, really hone their own craft, and for them to host their own shows and feel like there were people supporting them and not constantly like, fighting with owners to say that like this is important, this is an important space. I mean, initially the idea was that we would just open full time like a business, and I wrote that business plan with one of the other co-founders, Dennis Lee, and even with him, he hosted events like which we called the Alcove, which was like a small group of friends, which prototyped a similar thing. It was years ago. It was like in 2017, where we would paint on the walls. There'd be instruments. There was like tea and coffee. It was entry by donation, and I really saw like a very small scale of this concept working. And I was like, no, this is definitely needed, and these spaces are needed. But yeah, when we wrote the business plan, it essentially showed us like what our bigger vision was. And, we just started slowly talking to people that we knew within our own networks and started building out a team. Essentially, we started with prototypes, and it was really just looking at our business plan and being like, hey, what should we offer at this prototype? Like, how are we going to show what a full-time space would look like in a couple of hours? One of the first challenges is finding a way to explain it to people. I think that, when you explain other business ideas, they sort of exist. It isn't like there is a step-by-step guide or other businesses of like, if you wanted to open up a restaurant or things like that, yeah, the food would be different, but there's you see lots of restaurants. You can find lots of people that have operated them and learn from them. And so I think for us was really explaining the idea to people, because when people think like an art space or an art center, they either think of like a co-working space, which is for people that already think they're artists, or studio spaces, which this isn't it. We just want it to literally like be a hangout spot, a social space, a recreational space, kind of like how you go take swimming lessons at YMCA. So I think creating that comparison really, really helped. I guess another challenge is even kind of figuring out how you want to operate. Like, we really went back and forth, like, should we register as a charity? Should we just be a for-profit social enterprise? Should we be a nonprofit organization? And we had talked to like lawyers and things like that, kind of seeing like what the difference was in other people in the community. And we did go the nonprofit route, but sometimes you look back at things and you're like, we could have just went for-profit, and kind of battling back and forth of like, what's the best model for you in terms of like, what kind of business model will you have? A lot of times the spaces that we spend our times in, it isn't really a space where people are encouraged to be vulnerable or creative. And I'm talking about social spheres. And as a 23-year-old, I guess like it would either be, like I said, the restaurant, the club, the bars. I could go to an art gallery, but even then I feel like, I guess to backtrack, art is usually for consumption. I can go watch a show or do things like that. But I think that why we're doing it is because we do believe creativity is integral to the human experience. In every culture, like, what makes a culture vibrant is the music, it's the dancing, it's you know, it is the food and things like that, but I think that the creative part, we're not really encouraged to be creative. And it was funny because even at the first show, I'd be like, hey, like, you know, add to our mural, like, you know, paint this like little canvas, and people be like, I'm not a painter, and I'll be like, that's not the point. And a lot of times we like support artists when they're in their artistry, but it's like, how do they even get to that point? And even if they're not going to become an artist, it's like, we do believe creativity is integral to the human experience. Like, what would life be without art? And so I think that there needs to be more accessible spaces. A lot of times, if you want to be creative, it's usually in a private setting, it's usually very expensive. And I find, especially even as a teenager, it's like, where do they have places to hang out? I used to hang out at the mall, and that wasn't very productive, you know? That wasn't a place where I felt like I belonged or became vulnerable. I feel like a lot of social issues are rooted because people don't feel like they have a space to belong. And in maybe in gangs or in criminal activity, you find that belongingness because it's like that's a place where you feel like other people understand you. And I think there just needs to be more spaces like that. And I think that that's what this space would offer, especially for young people. And then like we hope to really like focus on programming for people that are younger, like kids and families and people with disabilities. Like, where is a space that you'll find like people of different abilities, you know, people of different ages and different backgrounds, really just coming together and just being creative and sharing their culture experiences and where they're from. There isn't really like a space that people are encouraged to do that.